He is a U.S. Army War College Fellow at the Fletcher School's International Security Studies program. So we'll give him a hand.
Thank you, Ken. Okay, I suppose it's appropriate that I lead off, so I'm going to start off first. I'm going to comment the fact that I don't have any audio visual, which is very unusual for an Army officer. Normally we like to show the huge deck of slides. We can kill you with them. But in this case, I'm going to try something new and not do that. But I'm going to talk about the future of counterinsurgency, insurgency, and coin. And these terms, they get thrown around quite a bit. First of all, you have to understand what an insurgent is before you understand the concepts behind counterinsurgency. An insurgent, by today's definition, is a participant in an armed rebellion against a constituted authority when those taking part in the rebellion are not recognized belligerents. Now that's the basic definition. Recently, by recently I mean within the past 15 years, the concept of multipolarity has been introduced. Multipolarity takes a view that you could have multiple armed groups being party to the fight, either in concert or in opposing each other. And it extends the concept of insurgency to situations where there is no recognized authority. The best example of this would likely be the Somali conflicts in the late 80s and early 90s. And it also applies for many of the conflicts we see today. Interestingly enough, current definitions exclude nonviolent movements as insurgent movements. And I think that's an error. Frequently, nonviolent movements are part of a hybrid organization that also includes an armed wing. One of the best examples of this would be Hezbollah. Hezbollah has both an armed wing and, in fact, in many ways, is a non-governmental organization too. With regard to the current theories on counterinsurgency and the future of counterinsurgency, I don't see a significant issue with the actual theoretical underpinnings. Concepts like David Kilcullen's 3 pillars, or Gordon McCormick from Naval Postgraduates, Magic Diamond, which interestingly enough, when I went there, it was a mystic pyramid. These concepts both addressing the centrality of the population and the need for the constituted government and the insurgent group to act upon that population are absolutely essential in understanding how you conduct an insurgency or fight an insurgency. However, there are some future trends that are emerging, and I'll cover 3 of them. The first focusing on structure, the second focusing on environment, and the third focusing on the human aspects. The 3 are, first, the shift of populations to urban centers that will have a dramatic effect on how and the means by which we have available to conduct counterinsurgency. The second is the growth of the role of information and how information can be leveraged in conflict. And the third is the increasing number of endless conflicts and why, in many respects, that is occurring, at least from my perspective. Now, not all insurgencies possess the 3 attributes that I'm going to focus on, but there are numerous illustrative examples from around the world. For example, urban, you can take a look at the activities of Jemaah Islamiyah, or JI, in Indonesia, particularly in Jakarta. The FARC, and their lack of savvy on information and how it was used against them. And then aspects of the Afghan coin campaign that talk about some of the human aspects and how those become literally conflicts without end. So, for looking at the mandate for counterinsurgency doctrine and how we continue to develop it, in the realm of urbanization, the first issue that we really have to address is the development of non-kinetic capabilities as true capabilities, not as add-ons or adjuncts, but as true capabilities. When you concentrate people, the ability to kinetically target them without significant, and the term that everybody's familiar with, collateral damage, becomes a very serious issue. Unfortunately, It is what almost all of our capabilities and our supporting capabilities are built around. And so, in reality, kinetic operations become a way of separating yourself from the population due to inadvertent collateral damage. And this becomes all the more relevant when you're dealing with populations packed into smaller areas. Additionally, we need to shift our intelligence focus from conducting actionable intelligence, the things we can target, and therefore apply our kinetic capabilities against, to producing deep understanding of the population and their perceptions of relevant issues. This falls into two categories. The first is not only what their current perceptions are, but then also understand at a level of how we can change, modify, or leverage those perceptions. In the broader view of FID, in the broader view of taking a look at FID, we also need to build this into our program as well. First of all, and I'm going to just generally throw this out to all of you, and this is very much focused on our experience in the United States. Think about the military policing an urban area. That is inherently has an air of instability when that's applied. Now granted, we are a unique experience, or a somewhat unique experience in the United States, but generally it is not, the military is not viewed as the proper force for policing, particularly in urban areas. Rural areas, you get a certain degree of tolerance. Urban areas, you do not. And so focusing FID and keeping in mind that we will have to include police forces in that effort is absolutely essential. This also has impacts on the fact that urban areas become very attractive targets for insurgent activities, terrorist activities. And when the police are well versed in handling it, and it's handled as a police operation, you actually gain in the perception of security in the eyes of the populace. Great examples of this are the Afghan CRU, or Capital Response Units, and the Indonesian Det 88, which is their National Police Counterterrorism Force. Additionally, as we look at building a FID program for urban policing and urban forces, we need to remember that it's an interagency effort, and we need to continue to involve that. Frequently, FID is viewed as a military and oftentimes soft capability. There's an organization that has done numerous operations in various areas called ICITAP. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but it is the International Criminal Investigative Training and Assistance Program led by the Department of Justice. The success and literally the marked improvement of Detachment 88 in Indonesia was largely in part due to a combined effort of the United States military and the Department of Justice to train not just at 88, but the entire Indonesian police force. The second issue I'd like to talk about is the proliferation of information technology and the need for a comprehensive information strategy. You have to appreciate that in future counterinsurgency operations, as with all future military operations, all activities will be subject to portrayal, and to use the term that one of the influence theorists out of UCLA, Kelton Rhodes, uses, framing by all the parties. And frequently, he who frames first in the manner most consumable by their audience will be the one that will establish, at least initially, the dominant frame for any portrayal of an activity. So understanding how and the risk that you incur with an operation can be handled, will play out in the informational environment is absolutely essential. And you need to understand it before you do it, not afterwards as an after action. Planning for the use of information influence as a maneuver element. Looking at or as not just a combat multiplier or as something you can add on to the end, but as something where you can truly make that your lead element. And I'm going to use a vignette from the FARC. Now keep in mind that the FARC were a rural insurgency in the truest sense. And they took some actions based upon other aspects of their structure that kept them from keeping their fighters in many ways informed. The Colombian military was well aware of this weakness and leveraged it heavily through numerous programs, to include the demobilization program. They were able to achieve a significant amount of erosion of FARC forces and ultimately command and control by the application of information operations. Keeping that in mind and the way they proceeded ahead opened up a lot of avenues for a successful counterinsurgency. And I think it's a fairly, at least in security circles, is fairly widely agreed that the FARC is definitely on the wane in Colombia and has diminished greatly. Accounting for and appreciating the planning, once again, in FID, and teaching our counterparts and partners that they have to consider information as well is absolutely essential. Both DED 88 and the Afghan local police, if you're familiar with that program that we instituted in Afghanistan, had significant blowback in the area of human rights. And I will never tell you that every single one of the members of DED 88 or the ALP are angels. However, once again, understanding that your actions will be portrayed and teaching them to be prepared and assess that risk and, frankly, to defend themselves in an information environment is absolutely essential for successful counterinsurgency forces to be developed within our partners. Lastly, understanding how relevant audiences and populations receive their information is an intelligence requirement. And I touched upon this earlier with the issue of culture. Frequently in our intelligence, the lowest priority activity that they will undertake is support to information operations. When in fact, counterinsurgency theory frequently states that the population is the center of gravity in an insurgent fight. So understanding the population should probably be one of the priorities for that. So that modification becomes all the more important, and you will avoid certain pitfalls. Once again, I have significant experience as a psychological operations officer. And if I have another senior officer tell me that we need to start using Twitter to communicate with the Afghans, I'm probably going to scream. Because they just don't really use Twitter. Now, the cell phone penetration, while it is high, is not quite at the level of ours, and it is not how they communicate. Now, Europeans, and when you're defending the war effort to a European population, absolutely, Twitter is probably the appropriate thing. And the American populace, yes, keeping them informed through Twitter is probably advantageous as well. Once again, I will say, never once did any activity towards the American population. It's not allowed. The last issue is the one that I believe is probably the most pertinent, and the one that requires the most effort to address. And that is the fact that insurgencies are not ending. There is a fair argument to be made that our experience in Afghanistan, in fact it's a very clear argument, is simply a sequel to the experience of the Russians. And in fact it is one long war with one very, a period of slight calm in the interwar period. A lot of Americans, when I speak to them about Afghanistan, don't realize that the Taliban never controlled the entirety of Afghanistan. The Northern Alliance was in control of the northern tiers of provinces. And so maintaining that, and realizing that Afghanistan has been going on for a long time is a very good example of what is occurring with insurgencies. And it's occurring in other places in the world too. I was just speaking to one of the audience about, I was taught French going through the Special Warfare Center in school. I was taught Zairian French, so I got to learn French for a country that doesn't exist, and didn't exist when I was being taught. But that war has gone on in Zaire, the D-Rock, Rwanda, Burundi, on and on. And the issue there lies much more at a human heart. Insurgencies, as we talked about, are not quick. They take a long time to prosecute themselves. And so much, one of the things that the development community has been looking at is what happens to the lives of people that live in those environments. The discussion is oftentimes called livelihoods, and it's simply stated, it's how people sustain themselves in their lives from a day-to-day basis, whether they're in a conflict or whether they live in Medford, Massachusetts. Well, livelihood structures are altered in environments of conflict. And the longer the conflict goes on, the more profound those alterations occur. People will determine and will come up with livelihood schemes to keep themselves alive in these environments. Unfortunately, the livelihood schemes that emerge in areas of conflict are oftentimes based on conflict themselves, and they're also frequently exploited. These livelihood schemes take on a life of their own, and they will defend themselves when they're uprooted or when there are attempts to uproot them. And unfortunately, the effort to uproot them frequently falls upon either a surviving or newly emerged government that is ill-prepared to do it. And if they have a sponsor, such as the United States, we are frequently looking for the exit door because the insurgents or the insurgency, from our perspective, is over. So addressing livelihood issues during the conflict to minimize their impact is absolutely essential. And it's a key role for any civil military, civil affairs, or civic forces as a part of a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy. Otherwise, the population simply becomes subject to a new set of belligerents, or, as is the case, the same set of belligerents who have simply rebranded themselves in a new light. Addressing the livelihoods is also, once again, not just a military function. It is an issue where numerous non-governmental and international organizations play a huge role. And one of the things we have to work out between both governmental, military, non-governmental, and international organizations is having a real discussion about how we can work together and where we can draw lines so that we don't, on the one hand, politicize or militarize developmental activities, but at the same time ensure that that the people that are involved or that are living in the environment of conflict have some other way. But as I end this, I'll just give you some tragic examples of where this is occurring right now. Afghanistan and its shift from opium cultivation to heroin production. A lot of people think that Afghanistan simply has always made heroin. No, it grew opium, absolutely. It has grown opium for quite some time. But what we see being exported out of Afghanistan now is processed heroin. And that is simply an effort on the part of quite a few of the combatants and belligerents trying to gather up as much of the profit chain as they can before they actually send it out of Afghanistan. It is so pervasive that there have been incidences where the Taliban has attempted to discipline and been unable to discipline what were former members of the Taliban who are now, by every definition of the phrase, drug lords. Blood diamonds in Africa, an excellent example. Artisanal mining in Central Africa. We all support this, by the way, with our use of cell phones. Central American cocaine and heroin production in itself. All of these show great examples. And I'll give you a historical example to give you a sense of just how hard you have to work to uproot it. And that was the Golden Triangle. A lot of the arguments about why the Golden Triangle's heroin production fell off have to do with the rise of the Afghan heroin production, for one, but then also what would be considered extreme measures leveraged by regimes that we don't want anything to do with. The Khmer Rouge, to name the Chinese and the Vietnamese governments, and the efforts they had to put forth to eradicate or limit, because they haven't eradicated it yet, their opium production. Okay. With that in mind, I would simply say that if we want to be effective in counterinsurgency, we need to take a look at urbanization and at information. If we don't want counterinsurgency to become a perpetual state in many places in the world, and a perpetual requirement for us to conduct in many places in the world, we need to take a hard look at livelihoods. And with that,